Hello and welcome back to my series of videos under the title The Science of Evolution. If this is your first time to my BuzzBaits channel, please let me introduce myself. My name is Tony B and I am a multi-instrumentalist, singer-songwriter with a passion for science and most importantly for the correct education of science. If you get the chance, please check out some of my other videos on the science of evolution, which cover subjects such as how the domesticated dog evolved from a now extinct wolf-like creature, how carbon-14 dating works, our relationship with Neanderthals, and an explanation of redshift, among other subjects. Many topics that support the evidence for evolution. However, our subject today is whales, and how whales provide evidence for macroevolution. A whale is a cetacean. A cetacean is an aquatic mammal, and they belong to the order of Artiodactyla. This order relates to even-toed ungulates, which are hooved animals, and the reason whales belong to this order, and as will be proved in this video, is because they evolved from even-toed ungulates. An example of a modern even-toed ungulate is the hippopotamus, and we will be looking at the relationship between hippos and whales later on during this presentation. When you look at this image, are you looking at what some religious young earth creationists might view as the same kind? Or are you looking at two very different species of living organism? Yes, I know you know the answer. One is a mammal, the other is a fish. But there was a time in human history when both would have been considered fish, and therefore would have been considered the same kind. But science and our continued study of living organisms has revealed to us that the whale is indeed a mammal. But wait a minute, humans are considered mammals. So how can a whale have anything in common with humans? What is it that provides the evidence that whales are mammals and not fish? Well, first of all, whales are vertebrates. They have a backbone. Whales have mammary glands from which females produce milk. These glands are on their bellies, towards the back end of the animal near the tail. Whales have a neocortex. In fact, whales have the biggest brains of all living organisms on planet Earth. The largest brain belongs to the sperm whale. Nevertheless, if you take into account brain to body size, then the tree shrew has the biggest brain, followed by humans. However, how those brains are used is another issue, and perhaps a different subject to the one we are focused on today. Whales have hair. Most whales have some hair when they are born. The majority of mammals are viviparous. They bear live young. The bones of the mammalian middle ear are like those of no other animal. Mammals have 3 bones. Fish have none at all. Whales have the 3 middle ear bones. And whales are also warm-blooded animals. All of this evidence confirms that the whale, in all its shapes and sizes, is not a fish kind. It is a mammal. Therefore, it has relatedness to all other mammals who share all the characteristics I have just illustrated. Relatedness to all those many different land-based mammals. But how can this be so? Whales live in the oceans and not on land. Today, whales live in the oceans, but this has not always been the case. We have proved that they are mammals and not fish. So let us now look at the evidence of their mammal past and how they once walked on land. Let us look at the evidence that supports the macroevolution of the whale. There are many varieties of whales within the modern species. Different sizes, different colours, different shapes. This is the result of microevolution. Small changes to phenotype over time within a species. This is observed. These changes are predictable. Natural processes have allowed these changes to whales, and the process for microevolution is the same process that is applied to macroevolution. The only difference is the addition of longer timescales to allow greater physical and behavioural changes to take place. Now that we have established the fact through more than one line of evidence that whales fit into what can be defined as a mammal, and as such has a relationship with all land-based mammals, let us look at how and why a mammal became aquatic. Let us look at the evidence. If you observe whales swimming, you will notice that their tail fins are not vertical like those of fishes, but horizontal. To swim, they move their tails up and down rather than back and forth as fishes do. This is evidence that whales evolved from walking land mammals whose backbones did not naturally bend side to side, but up and down. An example of this can be observed in a dog running. Its vertebrae column undulates up and down in waves as it moves forward. Whales do the same thing as they swim, showing their ancient terrestrial heritage. Another piece of evidence that whales were once land mammals is the observation of hind legs, a reduced residual pelvis, a remnant from their four-legged land ancestor. In whales, the pelvic bone is not attached to anything in the skeleton. They are embedded in the muscle. It can be said that a residual structure has no apparent function and appears to be residual parts from a past ancestor. However, that is not always the case. Evolution can put to good use parts of an anatomy or even organs that once served a different purpose in the survival of a living organism. This is all part of the process of evolution. A residual structure can change its function, such as the wings of the flightless birds, which no longer are used for flying but can now be used to add to balance. Vestigial structures are traceable to features found in less derived organisms. Humans, for example, possess an appendix, an organ located at the juncture of the large and small intestines. In more primitive versions of human mammals, this organ was the apex of a larger structure known as the cecum. The cecum housed bacteria, and this allowed these more primitive human mammals to digest cellulose, a necessary adaptation to feeding on leaves and other vegetable matter. However, human mammals evolved to process a diet relatively low in cellulose and so did not require an extensive cecum. Recent research has demonstrated that the human appendix may serve as a refuge for useful bacteria. Like the flightless birds, this residual organ in humans still serves a purpose. We find the pelvic bones in whales exactly where the hind legs of a mammal walking on four legs on a land surface should be. Here is an image of these bones from a whale. As you can see, the image is very much that of a pelvic structure. As we break down this image of a bowhead whale, we can identify the femur and the tibia. This pelvic structure represents the leftovers from the whale's evolutionary history. To support this observational evidence, we can also look at the embryonic development of cetaceans. Here is an image of a whale embryo. As you can see, At stage 12 of development, we find leg buds. Yes, leg buds. On a whale, however, as we continue to observe its development, we note that as the leg buds begin to fade, the rest of the whale continues to grow. Limb buds develop normally in whale embryos, as already illustrated. Limb buds progress to the condensation phase of early skeletal genesis, where nerves grow into the limb bud and the apical ectodermal ridge, a structure that ensures proper limb development and appears functional. Occasionally, the genes that code for longer extremities cause a modern whale to develop miniature legs. As you can see, we have evidence from two separate sources which tell us the same story, that whales were once four-legged land creatures, and this evidence is also supported by the fossil record. The diagram illustrated shows a series of hip bones from the whale's lineage fossil record, going from terrestrial species, Indohyus and Pachycetus, to more aquatic ones, Ambulocetus, to totally aquatic Basilosaurus, to living whales. The pelvic bone fossils provide evidence of previous hind legs, residual remnants that have now been adapted for sexual selection. The pelvic bones are therefore an example of sexual selection and today provides an evolutionary advantage to whales. Although hips are important for walking on land, they also serve other purposes. Among other things, they anchor muscles that control the sex organs. If these muscles are anesthetized in human males, then they have great difficulty achieving an erection. In male whales, the pelvis controls the penis with an especially elaborate set of muscles. In some whale and dolphin species, these muscles make the penis downright prehensile. Although these residual remnants of hind legs remain, they do so with a purpose to the sexual relationship between whales. They are an evolutionary adaptation. Their purpose has changed, but their importance to whale evolution remains intact. Cetacean pelvic bones are targets of sexual selection. A lot of people believe that a fin and a flipper are the same thing. They are not. Fins have no true bones or skeletal structure within, and are composed of primarily cartilage. Pectoral fins in fish can be mistaken for something similar to flippers in whales, but they are not flippers. They are very different. Therefore, in contrast, a flipper has a bone structure as well as cartilage, joints and tendons. The study of the anatomy of whale flippers reveals that they have the same bones as the forelimbs of other mammals. This means that this limb provides evidence that it was once used for walking on land. The evidence demonstrates this limb has now been modified through evolutionary processes. It now acts as a flipper and operates in turn to stabilize the body. So, let us look at that evidence. Please observe this image of the whale forelimb and compare it to other mammals who might use their limbs for walking or standing on a terrestrial surface. The forelimb on the whale retains three muscle groups. Triceps. Only the scapular head is functional as the humeral heads are residual, and antebrachial extensors and flexors. Please observe the similarities in this image of the whale forelimb to other forelimbs on current mammals. As we can observe, cetaceans flippers have the same bones as the forelimbs of other mammals. The humerus, radius, ulna, carpals, metacarpals and phalanges are all present. However, In cetaceans, the radius and the ulna, the forearm and the humerus upper arm, are fused. Thus, they do not have elbows. Therefore, it is a fact that whales have arms, a wrist, hand and finger bones inside their front flippers. They have the same bones that bats, hippos and humans have in their front appendages. Another important difference between whales and fish, and another similarity between whales and humans and other mammals, is the process of breathing. Fish have gills. This is how they breathe. Whales do not use gills to breathe air. Like humans, whales breathe air with two fully developed lungs. To allow this process to take place, they have blowholes, not noses like other mammals. They have two blowholes that look like nostrils. We are now accustomed to viewing these blowholes on the top of a whale's head, but this has not always been the case. So, what is the evidence that these blowholes were not always at the top of a whale's head and were once positioned where one would expect to find nostrils on a mammal? Let us now start to look at another area of evidence on our quest to prove the macroevolution of the whale, the fossil record. Let us look at an extinct species of whale called a basilosaurid. This species lived between 34 to 40 million years ago. The nasal opening of the basilosaurid is not on top like modern whales, and it is not at the end of the snout like land mammals. Instead, it is located right in the middle. This is regarded in evolutionary science as an intermediate species. And intermediate species is something predicted in evolution and observed in the fossil remains of the basilosaurid. Remember we were looking at the modern whale's pelvis. Well, at the back of the skeleton of the body of the basilosaurid, we find small, fully developed hips, legs, ankles, feet and toe bones. Remember, fully developed. These are too small for walking on land, but, as previously illustrated, could be useful while mating or even scratching away parasites. As you can see from these illustrations, we can still identify the basilosaurid as a whale species, despite the millions of years difference in evolution. The modern whale and the basilosaurid have much in common. Please observe the hind legs and the development in the forelimbs and skull. But the further back in time we go in the fossil record, the harder it is to distinguish whales today from their mammal ancestors. With that in mind, let us now go back 47 million years to the time of Miacetus. The fossil record provides us with further evidence of whale evolution in the form of Miacetus. Looking at this image of its skeleton, can you already see the similarity between the Miacetus and modern whales? Despite a 47 million year difference, can you see similarities between the modern beluga whale skeleton and Miacetus? Miacetus lived 47 million years ago. Its skeleton remains provide evidence that its hip bones were strong enough to allow it to walk on land. But why is it considered a whale ancestor? Well, their skeletons have all been found among sea creatures, which means they lived in the oceans. The evidence also includes webbed forelimbs and feet with short back legs. Their teeth matched those of the Basilosaurus. The unique structure of their middle ear bones matched those of the basalisaurid and the modern whale. In every respect, it appears that the Myocetus is an ancestor of the whale. It can even be described as a walking whale. I want to take you even further back in time, to a period over 50 million years ago, and to a species called Pachycetus. Pachycetids are classified as cetaceans due to the structure of the auditory bulla, the ear bone, which is formed only from the actotympanic bone. Although the shape of the ear region is cetacean-like, the blowhole is still absent at this stage of evolution. And although the ears of Pachycetids were specialized for hearing on land, they were able to listen underwater by using enhanced bone conduction rather than depending on the tympanic membrane. The teeth of Pachycetids resemble the teeth of fossil whales. This is another link to modern cetaceans. The elongated cervical vertebrae and the 4 fused vertebrae are consistent with artiodactyls. They display no aquatic skeletal adaptation. Instead, they display adaptations for running and jumping. Hence, Pachycetids were most likely aquatic waders. Fossil remains have all been discovered in what would have been moderately developed floodplains. Pachycetus represents a transitional taxon between extinct land mammals and modern cetaceans. We now come to Ambulocetus. This species lived about 49 million years ago. The fossil remains of Ambulocetids are always found in near-shore shallow marine deposits associated with abundant marine plant fossils. They were a vaguely crocodile-like mammal. The mandibular forearm in Ambulocetus had increased in size since the time of the Pachycetus. It indicates that a fat pad was likely to be housed in the lower jaw. In modern toothed whales, this fat pad in the mandibular forearm extends posteriorly to the middle ear. This allows sounds to be received in the lower jaw and then transmitted through the fat pad to the middle ear. Similar to the Pachycetids, the orbits of Ambulocetids are on the top of the skull, but they face more laterally than in Pachycetids. The hind limb structure of Ambulocetids show that their ability to engage in terrestrial locomotion was significantly limited compared to that of contemporary terrestrial mammals. And it is likely they did not come on land at all. They swam by pelvis paddling, a way for swimming which mainly utilizes their hind limbs to generate propulsion in water, and caudal undulation, a way of swimming which uses the undulations of the vertebral column to generate force for movement. As otters, seals, and modern cetaceans do. This is recognized as an intermediate stage in the evolution of the cetacean locomotion, as modern cetaceans swim by caudal oscillation, a way of swimming similar to caudal undulation but is more energy efficient. We now come to the DNA evidence. Yes, we have evidence of the genetic link between whales and land mammals, and one modern land mammal in particular. DNA confirms that the closest living relative to the modern whale is the hippopotamus. Yes, it's true, and it means that the whale and the hippo have a common ancestor which lived about 54 million years ago. What other evidence can be presented to show the link between the hippopotamus and modern whales? Well, for example, hippos give birth and nurse their young underwater, like whales. Both have multi-chambered stomachs. This is almost unheard of for meat eaters. And if you take a moment to study this illustration, you will note that both the hippo and the whale have internal testicles. The genetic and anatomical evidence proves the relationship between the modern whale and the land mammal, the hippopotamus. And as the whale did not evolve from the hippopotamus, and the hippopotamus did not evolve from the whale, then they had to have shared a common land-walking mammal ancestor from which both have evolved. In this video, we have looked at the anatomical features that establishes the whale as a mammal. Accepting the fact that it is a mammal and not a fish is important in understanding its evolutionary history. In this video, we have looked at the variation within the modern whale species. The beluga, blue whale, humpback, bowhead, etc., etc. This variation is the result of changes to allele frequency and gene mutation over time. This is the mechanism for microevolution. Another good comparative example of microevolution is the modern domesticated dog, scientifically known as Canis familiaris. DNA evidence proves that the modern domesticated dog is most closely related to the modern grey wolf, scientifically known as Canis lupus. Due to the fact that all the different variations in Canis familiaris did not evolve from the modern grey wolf, and the modern grey wolf did not evolve from a little pug, then we have to accept that the natural process of microevolution is the only reasonable answer, and that Canis familiaris and Canis lupus share a common ancestor from which they both evolved. Genetic evidence has proved that this ancestor was a now extinct wolf-like creature. The phenotype and behavioural changes observed in Canis familiaris are the results of microevolution. In this video, we have looked at the whale's closest living relative. DNA evidence proves that this relative is a land-walking mammal, the hippopotamus. But we know the whale did not evolve from the hippopotamus, and we know that the hippopotamus did not evolve from the whale. Therefore, like the modern domesticated dog, Canis familiaris, and the modern grey wolf, Canis lupus, the whale and the hippopotamus must share a common ancestor from which both evolved. And that common ancestor has to be a land-walking mammal. In this video, we looked at the embryology of cetaceans, which proves the early formation of hind legs in whales. This supports all the other evidence that the ancestor of the whale once walked on land. In this video, we have looked at the fossil record. By looking at the anatomy of the whale, we can trace its evolution by tracing the physical changes to its limbs and organs. Modern dating processes help to determine time frames for the fossil remains of the Pakicetus, Amblyocetus, Myocetus, etc., etc. This in turn establishes the transitional stages in the evolution between each species. The fossil record therefore allows us to observe the changes to the pelvis, forelimbs, the inner ear, the blowhole, and the positioning of the nostrils in species over time. I have presented not just one line of evidence for the evolution of the whale, but several. There have been several areas of evidence within this video that supports this evolution, from embryology to anatomy and comparative anatomy, from DNA and genetics to the fossil record and the modern processes that support this record. We have also seen the evidence for microevolution, which provides the genetic variation within a species. Well, the mechanism and processes of microevolution has been demonstrated in the evolution of the whale. The only addition to take this evolution from the Pakicetus to the modern whale is time. And the whale provides an excellent example of how microevolution becomes macroevolution. This video has presented an example of macroevolution. The various whales in existence today are the result of microevolution. All these variations in size and shape share in common the fact that they are mammals. As such, they share relatedness to other mammals. This video has presented the evidence of anatomy, embryology, DNA, genetics, and fossils to establish links with modern land mammals and ancestral mammals that lived millions of years ago. My name is Tony B, and this is the BuzzBaits channel. Thank you for watching this video, and I look forward to presenting you with future examples of the science of evolution.